Red tape has always been a problem, whether for average North Carolinians trying to practice their trade or skill to earn a living, or for business owners trying to deliver a product or a service to customers at a profit. But as we look past the COVID-19 pandemic, these impediments will be intolerable as people try to recapture their lives and renew their livelihoods. Now, the plan forward for reviving North Carolina's economy and rejecting the barriers that hinder that rebound is laid out in Carolina Rebound, which is a major policy report from the researchers here at the Jon Locke Foundation. You can read it all at jonlocke.org. Jon Sanders is Director of Regulatory Studies for the Locke Foundation. He authored one piece, a big piece of this report, Carolina Rebound. He joins us now to talk about it. Jon, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks for having me.
You focus in on some really vital matters as we look to the future and hopefully a revived North Carolina economy. And the first thing you write about, Jon, is about making it easier for people to get back to work. Tell us why you focused in on that first.
Main focus for that is because the economy was not built for businesses to be shut down for 2 to 3 months. That is going to create a huge problem going forward for people to get back to work, to earn a living. And so this calls for strong measures to help people get back to work. So this is not a time for playing games and pretending like things are the way they have always been. If the governor wants to talk about a new normal, this is the new normal. We have got to get people back to work. We've got to remove all these government impediments to people getting back to work, and we can't play favorites.
Let's talk about a big one that you say is a major barrier that really needs to be torn down. And here's the opportunity as we're looking for ways to quickly and efficiently try to get people back to work. You're talking about what's known as occupational licensing. First, just briefly explain what that is and how that can be a real impediment to someone finding a job.
Occupational licensing is the most extreme regulation on a legal occupation that government can make. It's an entry barrier. It says you cannot even start work in your field unless you have been licensed by the government, which means you've got to satisfy education requirements, you've got to satisfy experience requirements, you've got to maybe take a certain number of tests, and you've got to pay your fees. And a lot of these things are not necessary. And as the COVID crisis started, it became pretty clear that even licensing for nurses that other states had that we didn't were not as necessary. We waived licensing requirements and allowed the state to honor other states' licenses to get these people here. Well, I see this as something that we need to look at across the board for licensed occupations.
And Jon, one would think that if something works well in an emergency situation, if you recognize that you need to kind of clear the pathway in order to get people, in the case of the nurses you mentioned, medical care that we needed, one would think that going forward, policymakers would say, you know what, it worked then during COVID, so let's not put that back in place. But yet you're going to have people who say, we need to be really careful about public health and public safety. What do you say to them?
Well, that's the interesting thing about licensing is that it's a bipartisan issue that everyone seems to agree on, left and right. I mean, one of the strongest cases for freeing up states from licensing came from the Obama White House in 2016. It's a special interest problem. So when reforms come about, they marshal their forces and help beat it back. So I'm arguing now it's no longer time to listen to these special interests. We need to be paying attention to the people who need to get their jobs and need to get their lives back in order.
Well, Jon, when people go back to work, many of them are working for businesses, large and small. And you also focus in your portion of Carolina Rebound on rules and regulations that you say, look, once again, they are too heavy-handed. We can do away with some of these things in order to revive our economy. What would you get rid of first?
Several things I would like to do. First of all, I'd like to have small business regulatory flexibility analysis. Most states have it. The federal government has it. North Carolina is one of the very few that doesn't. What this does is it recognizes that compliance costs and all the bureaucratic paperwork is very difficult for small businesses with a few people on staff to comply with. So it allows waiving of some of those requirements, requiring fewer papers to come in, fewer reports. So it's a common sense thing. Another would be to limit the amount of regulations and find ways to cut with a red tape regulation review committee, red tape reduction committee, speed up periodic review and sunset of regulations. We've had good success in that, but it's once every 10 years, and I'd like to see it done once every 5 years. We're in a much faster environment.
And people who maybe don't manage or own a business might not realize how much of this kind of stuff goes on and how it impacts a business. And I can recall early on during the COVID pandemic, I read a story, a local business owner who had about a dozen employees or so said that it was so sadly ironic that his business had been shut down by Governor Cooper's statewide shutdown order, and yet he had just paid like some local taxes and fees, etc., and he wasn't even able to operate. And his comment to a reporter was, how is that possible? I'm paying for the privilege of doing business here, and yet the government then comes in and says, no, you can't.
Well, we saw multiple places across the United States and in North Carolina where regulations and red tape were waived to deal with the onset of this virus crisis. And so on Twitter and elsewhere, the phrase never needed was brought up, which was to stress the fact that, look, if we don't need these things in an emergency, we certainly don't need them afterwards.
Jon, you also write in Carolina Rebound about the issue of broadband and connectivity, and we certainly have seen that in the forefront here during the pandemic, particularly when it comes to how public education moved completely online. But this is an issue in the medical field as well. And what do you think is the step forward when it comes to connectivity that would allow the free market and private actors to go out and serve customers, but at the same time ensure that people have access to what they need?
Well, again, as I see it, the main feature is to waive regulations. The temptation will be to have government build the broadband for everybody, but those things have habitually proven to be failures and costly. We certainly don't need to be adding cost on people unnecessarily, but we can remove red tape and allow for building on utility rights-of-way and other municipal rights-of-way, and allow the private sector to innovate. I've seen innovation in the last couple of years where these small broadband companies are even putting up infrastructure on sweet gum trees and other natural things.